Hi folks, my name is Maeve, and today we'll be taking a close look at biodiversity. What's up with biodiversity? So let's start by getting a better understanding of what the word means. The word means the range or variety or the lots of different types of living things. So we're looking at living things, so they include plants and animals and fungi and bacteria and lots of other types of things, but mainly what we'll look at today are our plants and our animals. And we look at why this biodiversity is important and how we can make sure to look after the biodiversity close to where we live. So here are some types of animals, some species of animals that live here in Ireland. Do you recognise any of them? See how many you can name. Well done. So there was lots of answers there. So I'll just point out a few quick ones and let's see, did you pick those ones as well? So this bird here is a barn owl. The mammal underneath the barn owl is a badger. This one is an otter. This bird is a puffin. This guy here is a ladybird, a 7-spot ladybird. And let's pick one more. Anybody know what this is? It's a bat. Well done. So they're examples of the animals, the biodiversity animals that we have here in Ireland. Now, here's some beautiful pictures of some of the plants that we have here in Ireland. And there's so many more than just these ones, but here are just a few pretty pictures of some of them. Let's see, can you recognize any of them? Well done. Yes, so there's lots of answers there. So over here, we have an oak tree. You can see the little acorns. Down here are hazelnuts growing on the hazel tree. Down here we have something called meadowsweet, which grows in our verges in the middle of summer. And over here you might have recognized the holly with its red berries and its prickly, strong leaves. And this one up here is another beautiful tree, small tree in Ireland called the rowan or mountain ash. So there's lots more there, and see if you can recognize more yourselves. So these are all examples of some of the biodiversity, the plant biodiversity that we have here in Ireland. So we'd call that species diversity. So looking at all the different types of animals and different types of plants. So on the pictures in front of you are examples of different species or different types of birds. They cannot breed with each other. They're their own unique type or species. And biodiversity at that level is really important. Another new word, perhaps for some of you, is the word ecosystems. And an ecosystem is a group of animals or plants that like to live together. And they all kind of live in the same kind of place and the same location. And it's the same kind of environment. And they all interact and live together. And that's an ecosystem. And that's another level around which biodiversity is really important. So looking at the different types of ecosystems, that's also really important for us to protect and understand those different ecosystems. So for example, we have the marine or the sea ecosystem, which you see here in front of you. And in that you might find whales and fish and seaweed and turtles and seagulls and all the things you associate with the oceans and seas. Another ecosystem might be the woodland ecosystem. And in that, in Ireland, you might find squirrels and oak trees, bluebells and owls, for example. Here now, this is a beautiful river ecosystem. This is the River Liffey. And in Ireland, we have lots of beautiful, long, strong rivers. And as an example, within those river ecosystems, you might have willow trees, kingfishers, otters, again, we saw them earlier, fish, mayfly and dragonfly. And all of those species or types of animals and plants live together and work together and interact as a group. So they all belong to the river ecosystem. So they all have connections with each other in nature. So for example, if you think of the willow trees, they live along the banks of the river. They send roots down into the soil on the banks of the river, and they make the bank of the river nice and strong. And this helps animals like the otter and the kingfisher to burrow in and make burrows for, if it's the kingfisher, for a nest, and if it's the otter, it's for its home or holt. And so those trees, by being on the riverbank, help for the kingfisher and the otter to be able to live there also, to keep the bank nice and strong so their burrows don't collapse. So that's one way they're connected. Then if we look at the fish, the kingfisher eats fish and the otter eats fish. So both of them, if they want to live in this river ecosystem, they have to have access to fish. So there has to be fish in that ecosystem too. So the fish will only be there through the connection with the flies. The flies are a really good, tasty meal for the fish. The fish will only live there if there's plenty of food for it. So you see, everything is connected. Because the flies are there, the fish can live there. Because the fish is there, the otter and the kingfisher can live there. And so all of these animals are connected and rely on this ecosystem to work together and live together. So that's why we look at the ecosystem, as well as the individual species are important in biodiversity, but also this whole community together is an important ecosystem. And it's different to the woodland ecosystem that we looked at or the marine ecosystem. And there's lots of other ecosystems that we try and protect and keep them strong and healthy. Now, you might wonder, how does this diversity in nature affect us? And why is it important for us to look after it? Well, the answer is connections as well. So people like you and me, we all need help from so many living things in order to live. We get our oxygen from the trees, for example. Well, that's the oxygen, the air that we breathe, that comes from the trees. And the food in our plates comes from the strawberry plant or the apple tree or the fish that we catch in the oceans. They feed us every day. The plants and animals feed us every day in that way. We need wood from the trees to keep our homes standing, to build nice warm homes, to keep the roofs on. We need good strong wooden beams. And we also need clothes to keep us warm and dry. So clothes can be made from cotton, which comes from the cotton plant, or it can be made from wool, for example. Wool comes from sheep and some other animals. So we rely on all these plants and animals all around us to keep us happy and healthy and warm and fed. So really important. So we're connected to nature, just like all those other animals are. And these are all important jobs that nature and biodiversity give to us and do for us, and that we really could not do without. So we really need to protect it and look after nature in order for us to be happy ourselves. Now, unfortunately, all over the world, wild areas such as forests are being changed, chopped up or divided up by roads and removed altogether in some places. This happens for loads of reasons, and some of them are really good reasons, like we want to build a new road or we want to build houses for people or a new factory or a new hospital. So lots of good reasons why we might want to change the land. But it's really important that we make other space for wildlife then. If we're going to remove them from one area, we need to provide spaces for them to live and feed and have shelter in other places. So the main problem is their habitats are being lost. So that's another good word, a habitat. What does this mean? Well, a habitat is a home. And every animal has a particular, and every animal and every plant has a particular and preferred place that they like to live. And it is a place where they can really thrive and do really well. So here's an example. What do you see in front of you now? I'll play a little video and see what you can see. So these are frogs, and they spend most of their lives on land, and they live and they hunt in damp, grassy places and open woodland as well, wherever it's still a bit damp. And they like to have a little bit of cover, so places to run and hide if they think there's something out to trying to catch them. And they generally don't live too far from a stream. And the reason is that frogs use ponds, streams, bog pools, drains, and ditches to lay their eggs. Did anybody see the eggs in the last video? Can you remember what they're called? Frog spawn. And the frog spawn then, the eggs, the frog spawn, turn into tiny little tadpoles that you see in front of you now. So frogs, in order to live properly and to have babies, they need to have wet areas, pools and ponds for their babies to grow up in. So they need that in their habitat or their home. Okay, so as another example, these butterflies, the small tortoiseshell butterfly, is a popular garden visitor, and it can be found in lots of different places. So you're really likely to find them in your garden in school or at home or in your local community. They like to live in lots of different places, and they can live anywhere that there's enough flowers with nectar, sweet nectar to drink. And that's what they're doing there on the thistle. This is the creeping thistle, and those purple flowers are full of delicious nectar, and those butterflies are feeding on it. So they're not too fussy when they're butterflies. The only thing they really need in their habitat is nettles. And not to feed on, but to lay eggs on. The nettle is the food plant of the baby caterpillars, and that is why the nettles are so important to have as part of the home or the habitat that the small tortoiseshell butterfly lives in. So we should try and keep our nettles in patches in the corners of our gardens or the corners of our fields, wherever we can, because they're really important for these little creatures. So when we make changes to the land, different animals and plants lose their preferred habitat or their home. So if we remove a hedgerow, a hedge, or cut down all the nettles in a nettle patch, or we build a road through a woodland, or pull the water, drain the water out of a wetland, the animals and plants that had been living there will have nowhere to live anymore. So it's the changing of habitats that is the biggest problem for biodiversity at the moment. So what can you and your school do to help biodiversity? Well, the good news is there's lots of things you can do. You can make sure that your school community and your family know that biodiversity is important to start. And then you can also try to come up with actions and an action plan to help with wild animals and plants in your local area. And then, of course, you have to take action. So a very direct way in which we can help biodiversity is how we manage our spaces. So that's our outdoor spaces. So that's our gardens in school or our gardens at home, or even our balconies and the green spaces in our community where we live. The best thing to do to start is to map the area you're hoping to improve. So draw a map of the animals and plants that you already find there before you start making any changes. And once you've drawn that map up, then you can come up with ideas of how you can improve the situation and create more biodiversity in your area. So once you know where your starting point is, you can draw a plan of action. There's lots of things you can do as part of that plan of action. So think of ways to improve and protect local wildlife and landscapes, whether it's in your school or at home, a green space in the city, your local beach or a local river. There's lots of options. For example, creepy crawlies and small bugs and critters love to live in and around wood. So you could make some kind of a wood pile or a bug hotel, and generally wooden structures. And these provide shelter and protection for small creatures, such as the woodlice worms and millipedes that you see here in this video. You could also consider providing nest, roost, and hibernation places for wildlife, and you could provide food through artificial planting and through feeders and planting schemes. This is a beautiful wildflower bank, and you see some purpley pink heathers in bloom. Generally speaking, we try to grow plants that belong in Ireland as much as possible. If we have lots of flowering plants in our outdoor spaces, there will be lots and lots of delicious, yummy, sweet nectar for the bees and butterflies and moths to feed on. And then these insects in turn become food for bats and birds. So if we can provide the flowers in our gardens for the insects, we're really helping to boost biodiversity all across the food chain. For the best plants and guidance on feeding bees and butterflies, visit the All Ireland Pollinator Plan website at www.pollinators.ie. So if we allow corners of our garden to grow a little bit wild, like I mentioned, the nettles, and let long grass grow in piles of leaves, we're really creating a great habitat or a great home for animals. And this might include for hedgehogs, shrews, caterpillars, and bumblebees. Lots of different types of animals can live in those wild spaces. Wild cover, such as ivy and bramble, support lots of animals too by providing hiding places for them and giving them food as well through flowers and berries throughout the year. So they're also really great options. Planting native trees, that means trees that live in Ireland or have lived in Ireland for a long time, would be really great, but only if you have space, because they can grow quite large. This is a great way to help biodiversity and also to prevent climate change from getting any worse. Think about what might suit your school or your community area and learn about what plants are good for wildlife. And be sure to plant and protect those wherever you find them. And there are lots of practical materials to help you with that kind of work on the All Ireland Pollinator website and on the Green Schools website as well. Another very powerful step that you can take is to talk to your local councillors, politicians, your leaders in your school and leaders in your local community, and tell them that you want them to make sure that nature is looked after whenever they are taking action and guiding policy themselves. So talk to your representatives, send them letters, and get them on your side to help you promote biodiversity in your community. To find out more about the theme of biodiversity and for further information, links and teaching resources, please visit the Green Schools Ireland website at greenschoolsireland.org/biodiversity. Good luck with your action. So that's it, folks, from me. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed our session. I'm going to hand you over to Patrick now, and he will do some wonderful activities with you on the theme of biodiversity, and you can put into practice some of the things that you might have learned during the session. Best of luck with your actions. Bye-bye.
Hello, my name is Patrick, and I hear that you've been talking to Maeve about biodiversity and how nature is in trouble. And we need to help nature. So I'm going to share a story with you today, something that happened last year in my community about how we improved our community space. And then we're going to go on a journey after that and think about running our own campaign and how we do that. So first of all, let's tell you a little bit about the place where I live. I live in Waterford. And I live in an estate, and this is the estate that you can see here. And you can see that there's lots of actual grass in our estate, and it's mown quite frequently. And interestingly, there's not that many trees, and there's no flowers, and there's no hedgerows. So essentially, there's no habitat for wildlife. You wouldn't kind of really see bees and butterflies here. And it's also not very nice for people, because there's nothing nice to look at. No one gets excited by grass. So I decided last year that let's change this. So I started off working outside our own house with my mum. And we decided to plant some bulbs and some wildflowers. And this little space here transformed into something very different and very beautiful. We then decided, right, let's do a bit more than that. Let's actually plant a hedge. So the side of the house, we decided that we would take some cuttings and we get my niece and nephew to plant them into the ground so that they develop into a hedge. Because if you attended the first session today, you'd have heard about a hedge banquet and how hedges are amazing habitats and provide lots of food for wildlife. We also then were like, right, let's grow our own plants and flowers. So we sowed lots of seeds, and that was loads and loads of fun. We decided to go a step further, and we had a chat with people in our community, the lady who mows all the grass in the area, and we asked, could we make a little nature space in this community area and put a pond in? Because a pond is one of the best things you can do for encouraging biodiversity into your area. And they said yes. So I built a pond with my dad. It was the first pond I ever built. And we were hoping that we might attract some frogs. And if we did attract some frogs, they'd need somewhere to hibernate over the winter. So we made a frog bunker, which is basically loads of logs that you dig a big hole in the ground, you put loads of logs in so there's loads of spaces, and then cover it up and the frogs can hibernate in there. And we also made a decision to let the grass grow, because the frogs would need somewhere to hide in the summer when the temperatures are hotter, and they'd need somewhere to get their food. So something did happen about this, because actually not everyone in the community likes long grass. They thought that the long grass would look really untidy, and somebody in our community made a complaint to the council, and they said that they'd like that grass to be mown. And that's okay. It's okay to make a complaint, and it's important that people feel that they can complain, and everyone has an opinion. Unfortunately, the council came out and they mowed the grass before they spoke to the community there. But this was actually, in a way, it was quite good, because it got us to talk to the students in our area and young people and get them to write letters to the council about what we were trying to do. And we also went door to door in our community to talk to people about why we're doing and see if we could get their support. So we wrote a letter to the council explaining what we were doing, because we might have not communicated that properly at the beginning, and then we got them on board, which was great. And then I spoke to my neighbours and more neighbours, and I was like, right, do you mind actually if we do more work in our community, if we go on beyond just outside my house? And they were fine with that, and so we decided on some areas that we'd plant some flowers. And what was really interesting and wonderful is the pond had some tadpoles and some spawn, and it attracted not just the young kids in the area, but the adults too, who came to look at all the frog spawn and then the tadpoles and eventually the frogs. And that was really exciting, because we got to know more of our neighbours, people that actually we hadn't spoke to ever before. So actually this space started to turn into something beautiful. There were more flowers, there was more habitat, and it was way better for wildlife. And we started to see wildlife. We started to see the bees. And you can see this female bee has got, she's feeding on this cornflower, and she's got pollen sacs on her legs. And this was brilliant. Those bees wouldn't have been there if we hadn't planted all those flowers. And what was really interesting is that when the flowers went to seed, after the bumblebees pollinated them, I saw the birds feeding on the seeds. So this was brilliant for wildlife. We saw butterflies that wouldn't have been there otherwise. And we saw frogs, which was amazing. And these frogs are really, really tiny. And all of the wildflowers in our community space, they started to bloom and flower because the grass wasn't mown. And they provided food for all the pollinators. And still there were some people in our community who were not totally convinced about the long grass and had some concerns, but they were kind of seeing how the space was changing and how there were benefits. The children in our estate loved the long grass. They loved playing in it. And that was great to see. And my dog did too. And these spaces that were created, these areas where we dug up all the grass and planted the flowers, they became something incredibly beautiful. And that improved everybody's well-being. And what was really interesting and lovely is that we had all these sweet peas growing. Now this is a picture of an earlier time in the garden, but the sweet peas, this whole place is covered in flowers, like in the picture before. Just like here. And so these sweet peas are really tall, and this is one of our neighbours who was cutting all the sweet peas, which we wanted her to do, because if you don't cut them, they don't continue flowering. So cutting the sweet peas and giving them as bundles to neighbours. And they're really smelly and nice. And so that was really nice, because it connected us with the community around us. So We didn't really have an action plan for what we were doing. We kind of had it in our heads, but we didn't write it down. But if we were to have an action, if we did write it down, this is kind of how it would look. So what was our goal? We wanted to change our community space to make it better for nature and better for people. What can we do to reach our goal? Well, we let the grass grow. We planted some cuttings to make a hedge. We made a pond and a frog bunker, and we planted some flowers. We dug up the grass to do that. Some grass in some areas. Who needed to be on board? Well, we could have done this better. We needed to get the council on board. We needed to get all the neighbours on board and maybe go door to door at the beginning rather than in the middle. But we did speak to some of the neighbours in our estate where most of the kind of digging was happening. But I think it's better if you can kind of get more people on board at the start. And what could get in our way or hold us back? Well, really it's about people not knowing why we're doing this and why it's so important for nature. And it's that lack of communication. So, here's an activity for you if you've got time. We're going to have a walking debate. Now, there's lots of ways you can do this. I'm going to explain one way, and then your teacher can decide what is best to do for your class. So I'm going to give you some statements, and you're going to have to think about it. Do I agree with the statement or do I disagree? Now, it's a walking debate, so you can decide maybe the left side of your classroom is the left wall is agree and the right side is disagree. And you will all stand up when I ask the statement, if your teacher wants you to do that, and then you'll go to the left side or the right side depending on whether you agree or disagree. But actually, some of you might think, well, I don't actually agree or disagree. I'm kind of in the middle. And that's okay too. So that's how we're going to run this. And then once you take a position, and you might have like 10 to 20 seconds to do that, then you have to think to yourselves, well, can I explain why I've taken this position, why I agree or disagree, or why I'm in the middle? So your teacher can pause the video now and think about how you want to organize that. And then I'm going to go through the statements with you. Okay, first statement. All grass in estates should be mown regularly to allow children to use the grass to play sports. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Are you somewhere in the middle? So take your positions now and be ready to explain it. You can pause the video now. Second statement. Long grass will attract rats and mice, and that's why we need to keep the grass cut short everywhere. So you can take your positions, agree or disagree, and your teacher then will ask you questions about why you've taken that position. So you can pause the video now. Now that was actually a concern for some people in our estate. And the thing is, that's actually not the case. It won't attract rats and mice. You might get some rats and mice who are visiting the area, but there's nothing there for them to attract them, like rotten food or anything like that. But rats and mice actually are part of the food chain, and they're really important. So barn owls would feed on rats or mice. And if you don't have any rats and mice, you've got no barn owls. That's one of the reasons actually barn owls their population has dropped, is because there's less food for them, and people have been poisoning rats and mice, and then that poison has been poisoning the owls. Okay, next statement. Community spaces look nicer when there are more trees and flowers in them. We should be working together to transform our community spaces, which will help nature and increase biodiversity. Do you agree, disagree? Be ready to explain. You can pause the video now. Instead of spraying weeds with herbicides, we should be weeding the weeds by hand. The herbicides are chemicals that actually kill insects as well as the weeds. Do you agree, disagree? Be ready to explain what your thoughts are. You can pause the video now. Planting up a community space will help create better communities with people who are healthier and happier. Do you agree, disagree? Be ready to explain your thoughts. Pause the video now. Right, I hope that was fun. Now to the last activity of the day. This is where you design a campaign to change your community. So you're going to try and convince your neighbours to not mow the grass until the end of May. in some areas of your community next year. And that will allow the flowers and the grass to bloom, and that will provide food for insects in the local area. After May, it would be better if the grass was mown with the blade raised higher on the mower every 6 weeks instead of more frequently every 2 weeks. That will allow, when they do cut the grass, that will allow the flowers to come back quicker. If you don't live in an estate, maybe focus your campaign on your own family and try to convince them to do this with a small strip of grass. Now, these are some things that you're going to need to consider. Why is it important? How will it benefit people as well as nature? Who will be involved in your campaign? How are you going to communicate with neighbours? Letters, videos, events, door-to-door chats? And when you've finished putting your campaign together, perhaps your teacher could take a picture and tweet it so that other schools can join in the conversation and find out what you're doing in your school. And you can use the hashtag Climate Nature Summit or hashtag COP26. Now, there's one resource that might help you to do this, which is the resource that I looked at earlier, which is about creating an action plan. And I will put this on the website so that your teacher can print that for you if you want. But you could also just draw it in your copy. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful day.